Good morning and welcome to City of Hope in Duarte. This is the LACNETS meeting for September, and we're very honored to have a special guest about a very timely topic today, which is insurance. As you know, open enrollment period's coming up, and so a lot of us have questions about what changes we might want to make. So we'll get to that in just a moment. I wanted to make a few announcements about LACNETS, and first you are seeing all of LACNETS here. This is Lisa Yan, our program director, and Lindsay Judavine, director of communications. And I'm Giovanna Mbezi, the executive director. We're a small but mighty team, and always look forward to hearing your feedback. If there's anything you'd like to see us do, things we're doing well, things you would like to see added, just let us know. And big news, it's a little ways off, but we have just confirmed the date for the annual conference, which is going to be here at City of Hope, not in this room, but on June 20th, so 2020, June 6/20, 2020. You can save the date on your calendar. And for those of you who haven't been, this is our once a year, we do a full day conference, and with many physicians and healthcare providers and experts on neuroendocrine cancer. And it's a really wonderful day. There's usually about 300 patients and caregivers. So we're looking forward to being back at City of Hope for the next one. And I think next month we'll be at Cedars-Sinai, October 8th. All of these are here and also on our website. And that talk is going to be with Megan Laszlo, who is the dietitian for the Cancer Center there. So I know lots of us have questions about nutrition, what to eat, what not to eat, trigger foods. So that will be October 8th. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Dan Lee, who is an oncologist at City of Hope, and tell us a little bit more about the program here and what they've been up to. So thank you, Dr. Dan Lee.
Thanks so much, Giovanna, and thanks everyone for coming back to City of Hope. Just wanted to, again, really thank everyone for continuing to support our program here. I think for many of you that I've met, I think what you've seen is that we've really had continued extensive growth and really value our connections with patient advocacy and continue to be a voice for patients. I can tell you some of the interesting things that we're doing. One thing was that we recently received a NIH federal grant to get patient perspectives for patients that are undergoing treatment with neuroendocrine tumors, because we feel that that's a really important voice for the patient that oftentimes is not heard in terms of what you value in your care more so than anything else. And then I think the other areas that we always continue to strive is that I know a lot of you have questions in terms of how you can potentially come and see us. And I think this is why we decided to focus on insurance again, because oftentimes what we heard from patients is that sometimes navigating the healthcare system is somewhat relatively difficult these days, and we certainly understand that. I can tell you that there are different nuances that are involved, and I will let Dayana, fill in us on that. But regardless to say, I would say, even if you need a one-time second opinion consultation with us and with our entire group here that's focused on neuroendocrine tumors, that's always doable. Just reach out to us and we can, connect you with one of our financial counselors and figure something out to do that. So even if I can at least help you guys from seeing you guys at least once, we would love to, be able to do that and then sort out the insurance policies and different nuances accordingly. So that's all I had to say for now. I think later on in November will be Net Cancer Day, and I think I'll have more to say at that time, really to describe more of our portfolio from research and really try to change care for patients with neuroendocrine tumors. Thank you.
So I want to introduce our speaker, but first I'd like to say a little word about the organization she works with, the Cancer Legal Resources Center. This is an organization that is based right here in Los Angeles out of Loyola, and is a tremendous resource for cancer patients. If you haven't been to their website, I urge you to go, CLRC.org. And they have consistently provided speakers and resources for us. Many patients on their own as an individual have contacted them. They've helped people with disability, getting on disability and information about disability, all kinds of things, and run wonderful programs. So we're extremely excited that Dayana Pelayo has agreed to come join us this morning from the Cancer Legal Resources Center. And please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. So as Giovanna said, I'm Dayana Pelayo. I'm a staff attorney with the Cancer Legal Resource Center. Just want to clarify one thing. We've moved. We're actually in downtown LA, but still relatively close to Loyola. Today, we're going to talk about navigating health insurance plans and open enrollment. I'm also going to touch on a few other topics. So let me also give you an introduction to our organization. So our goal is to provide information and resources to excuse me, on cancer-related legal issues to cancer patients, survivors, caregivers, pretty much anybody affected by cancer. We try to provide that information. We're based on an educational model, which is to say we don't provide legal advice or direct representation, but we really do try and connect you, say if you're looking for a private attorney or a legal aid organization, someone who would be able to help you with your issue. And the main way that we provide our assistance is through our telephone assistance line. It's free information and assistance. It's a nationwide service. We are located in California and in LA. We do get about a third of our calls from California, but the other parts are other parts of the nation. We have resources in about every state that we try to connect you on. If it's not something that we have, we look into it and at least try to get you connected to that information. All the information also is confidential, so that's something that you can feel free to ask any questions. So on the slide, you'll see that we have two ways of being able to connect with us. The first one is through our online intake. It's a pretty basic form. You have to fill out a few demographic information, contact information, get a sense of what type of questions you're going to have, and a brief synopsis of what issue you have. And then it's a pretty fast form. If you aren't able to connect via computer or you rather speak to somebody over the phone, we do have volunteers that can call you and run through the intake. I will say that does delay a little bit because you might be caught up in phone tag, but it's available for anybody who maybe is not comfortable navigating a computer. Okay, so one of our major resources is the Patient Legal Handbook. It's a pretty comprehensive guide on some of the common issues that people who are affected by cancer face. It's a little book. We have a few available if you're interested in bulk orders. It's also something that we can process. It's free. It's also free to download online, and we have presently copies in English and in Spanish. We also have a plethora of handouts on many various subjects available on our website. Some that might be relevant would be maximizing and optimizing health insurance benefits. We have a step-by-step guide to health insurance appeals, and we also have a pretty good collection of health-related information that's already in the handout. Okay, so often people ask us, what are cancer-related legal issues? They can vary. The top three that we tend to get are related to health insurance, employment, and disability insurance. But this slide does show you some of the other questions that end up coming up from some of our callers. In red, you're going to see the subjects that I hope to cover during today's presentation, but this is not at all an exhaustive list. Okay, so let's start with an overview of what today's presentation is going to be. We're going to go over some insurance basics. Some of this might be very familiar to you guys, but we like to just start with a good foundation. And then we're going to talk about open enrollment and insurance options. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of time to talk about some disability insurance questions that may come up. Okay, so let's start with the first part of an insurance basics. It's understanding your policy and who's responsible for understanding your policy. It's the patient's responsibility to understand his and her insurance coverage. Saying I didn't know that wasn't covered usually doesn't work. Or even, even if you call your insurance company and they tell you when you call on the phone, they might say, you know, confirmation or evidence of coverage is not a guarantee that's going to be coverage. You really do have to go through your policy and understand what the limitations are and what the terms are. The other thing that may come up is if you're going to a doctor's office and they may offer to verify whether or not a service is covered, that still not might be the best option because ultimately you're going to be the one who's responsible for any billing issue. So we want to start out by knowing that it's your responsibility to be informed, and hopefully I can connect you with some resources to help you be informed as to how to best optimize your plan and understand its limitations. Okay. So the types of insurance and plans can be conceptualized in two ways. So there's public programs such as Medicare and Medi-Cal, and then there's private insurance. It could either be through your employer or it could be a plan that you purchase individually. Medicaid is an insurance for people who are low income and meet other criteria, and Medicare is usually insurance for people who are 65 and older or have been on Social Security disability insurance for 24 months or more. And then under the subset of private insurance, you'll see there's self-insured and insured. That distinction comes up when you're trying to file an appeal, and that's something that you might want to look into if you're actually considering an appeal from like a denial of coverage. And grandfather plans were kind of an issue around 2014 when the ACA rolled around. I'm not sure that that's still a very prominent issue, but some people might still have grandfather plans from before the ACA. Okay, so once you know what type of plan you have, if it's through your employer, if it's through your individual plan, or if it's even through a public program, you should understand the networks of the plan. These should be some of the terms that you'll see in a type of plan. So we'll start with the first one. So an HMO is a health maintenance organization. They usually have limited choices for the members. You have to select certain doctors or hospitals within that participating medical group. That's typically why they're less expensive, because there's less options. There can be two types of HMOs. The first is where physicians practice in their own office and they belong to medical groups. That's known as an independent physician association, sort of like IPA. You can think about this in terms of like Blue Cross or Aetna. And then the second is a standalone facility. It's an insurance company hospital that you visit for all your care. A common example of this is Kaiser. So the next option is a PPO. And that's a preferred provider organization. So it's a network of providers. It's less limited than an HMO, and physicians tend to be reimbursed at higher rates. One of the things that's also very attractive about a PPO is that if you're interested in looking at specialists, that might offer you a lot more flexibility in finding a specialist that's covered through your insurance. Okay, and then the last two, I do want to mention, they're not that common, but you might see them come up. The first is a POS, it's a point of service. They combine the aspects of an HMO and a PPO plan, where you have to get a PCP or your primary care physician to make referrals like an HMO, but you'll have some freedom of choice of providers that are out of network, similar to a PPO. And the last one is an EPO. It's an exclusive provider organization. You can use hospitals and doctors within the network, but you don't have any out-of-network benefits. You'll see this a lot at the health exchange in Covered California. Those would be some of the more, I've seen them a lot in the bronze options. They may not be the most economical choice though if you're not comfortable with that network or the restrictions that they impose. Okay, so where do you find your policy? There are a couple places that you can look for it depending on the type of plan that you have. So generally you have a summary plan description, which sort of sounds what it sounds like. It's a description, just a summary, but you really want to look at your evidence of coverage booklet or the actual contract itself. That's really going to have subsections. It's going to tell you what the procedure is for, say, an appeal or for getting a second opinion. It's the actual contract that you're signing with the insurance company to get covered for your healthcare services. The other thing to know is, there are also state and federal protections that supersede that contract, even if that contract has a clause. So that might be something to think about when it comes to like preventative screening, or even not having to pay a copay or deductible for an annual screening and coverage of pre-existing conditions. And we do have a lot of resources on health insurance on our website. The other one that I kind of glossed over was your HR department. If you are getting your insurance through your employer, they should also have a packet of your employee benefits that might include the insurance policy, or at least they can connect you for a resource for where to get it. You can also usually find this online. If you have an insurance company that has like an online portal, you should be able to get that summary of evidence of your coverage. All right, so policy terms, I'm sure these terms are very familiar, but I always think it's a good idea to go through them. So let's talk about a copay. It's a fixed amount that you pay for a covered service. You usually pay that when you get the service. Probably most office visits or specialists are going to have a copay, and it's going to be a fixed copay that you'll either be billed there or billed later. It's very good to get familiar with the copays for the different services you're going to use. An example of copays are, say, a general office visit could be $20, a specialist can be $40. The next thing that you'll see when you're shopping for plans is a deductible. So it's the amount that you have to pay each year before your health insurance starts to pay. So for example, if your plan is $1,000, your insurance won't pay anything until you've paid $1,000 out of pocket for those covered services. Usually your first visit or any visits up to that $1,000 can meet the deductible. You also want to look at your plan to see if certain visits won't count towards your deductible. That's something also that I've seen come up with some insurance plans as a way to, something I have seen come up in insurance plans. The other thing that comes up with insurance plans is co-insurance. So this is generally an amount that you might be surprised at. I know when I was looking at Covered California, I didn't really understand what co-insurance was. So it's even though you've paid, insurance doesn't necessarily cover 100% of the cost. You usually will have a co-insurance, which is your share of the cost on top of what your health insurance plan is going to pay. And it's usually calculated as a percentage. So you paid your copay and then you're billed a random amount, say $8.93 for a physical therapy visit, and that visit was $89.30. That means that you probably had a 10% co-insurance. So once you meet your deductible, you might still even have to pay co-insurance, and certain services, I understand, can be covered at a different co-insurance percentage. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at your policy and if you're trying to switch between different policies as a matter of understanding your expenses. The next thing that I want to talk about are pre-authorizations. It's very important to know whether or not a service requires a pre-authorization. Usually you have to get your doctor to submit it before you can get that insurance, before you can get your insurance company to cover it. And then the other thing to note about pre-authorization is that simply because you did get pre-authorization, again, does not mean that's going to be ultimately covered. So you'll have to check to see what the steps are. Do you require pre-authorization? Then will that service, even with the pre-authorization, be covered by your health insurance plan? It's usually required for expensive procedures like MRIs. The last key term to be familiar with are limits. So again, I'm going to use a physical therapy example. Some plans may limit you to 20 physical therapy visits per year, while other plans allow you an unlimited number of visits. And sometimes you'll even have to go back to your doctor to ask for what we're calling a prescription to re-up your ability to get that physical therapy, that covered again. So again, you will see that in your policy to see what services are limited to what extent and if they require an additional hurdle of going back to your doctor to get that service. Okay, so once you understand your coverage, there are a couple of things that you can do to help you sort of maximize your benefits. If your insurance company has a case manager, that might be something to look into. If you're in regular contact with your insurance company, it could also help to have a go-to person, even if it's not a case manager. So you call your insurance company, you might want to try and speak to the same person. You can establish a rapport. You can maybe try and get that extension. It's just something that eliminates less repetition and it can be a bit more consistent. And then the other thing is a little self-explanatory as well, but keep accurate records, date, times, and names. Especially if you're talking about a prior authorization. Sometimes they'll issue you one, but you won't get a copy. It's very good to have a copy yourself. So in case you have a billing issue, like you didn't get a prior authorization, well, you have the actual copy. And then the last part is reviewing all your bills and opening your mail. It can be a bit daunting to it can be a bit daunting if you get a lot in the mail and you don't want to see it, but that can save you some headaches. You can see if there's any like billing issues or double billing or coding issues. And we do have some resources on medical billing if anything does come up when you're reviewing your charges. And another way to optimize your health insurance is to really ask questions when you're at your doctor's office. You can ask to write down notes or ask to record the visit, or sometimes you can even ask to bring somebody with you in case the information you're getting can be very overwhelming. That way you get a good sense of what they anticipate. Say it's a treatment plan, you can start planning for either any anticipated expenses or going through some of the administrative hurdles of pre-authorization, checking that coverage. That's just something that's a good way of optimizing your health insurance. And the other thing that I do want to mention, and I know that Dr. Lee touched on, is second opinions. You shouldn't be afraid to ask for a second opinion. In your insurance summary of cover or evidence of coverage, it should tell you the procedure for a second opinion. Usually, a second opinion should be covered at the same rate as, say, you're getting that service. But again, do consult your insurance, your policy. And if you are having trouble with the second opinion, there is an organization in California that helps with second opinions. I believe they're a nonprofit and it's a free service if that's also something that you feel you might want some assistance with. All right, and we also like to explain the ACA. So the ACA prevents, and it's the Affordable Care Act, it prevents discrimination based on pre-existing conditions. And this is one of the biggest changes, and I think one of the best protections that the ACA does offer. Other forms of discrimination that used to happen before, you'll see it's health status, medical history, genetic information, and gender. Usually for plans that meet the minimum essential coverage, they can no longer discriminate based on a pre-existing condition or a genetic disposition, including cancer. This is a rule for health insurance. Other insurances like life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care insurance, they're not covered by the ACA. Some states offer protections for those type of insurance. California does have some protections. If you wanted more information on that, that's something that we can certainly give you information on. So for health insurance, because of the ACA, you can buy health insurance, marketplace insurance. You should be able to get Medicaid regardless of your health history. So when you are looking at plans, they still can consider two things, generally two things, which is the type of plan that you're getting, your age, and your rating area, which is your geographic location. Before, and I know I said that they can no longer consider gender. What was happening before is that they were discriminating. Women were getting policy rates at a higher rate. Now that's no longer the case. What they will start to consider is your age and then your area. The area usually comes up for, say, like metropolitan areas. They tend to have more expensive rates than, say, a smaller town. Okay. And we also like to include a little update on the ACA. We still get questions as to whether or not the ACA was repealed. It has not. We had this question come up a lot more once during the time of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. I want to explain what that means. So essentially, they repealed the penalty of the individual mandate. The individual mandate of the ACA was what compelled people to have health insurance coverage. If they did not, they would have a penalty depending on, how long they went without insurance and how much, I think, their income. So as a result of this tax reform, the penalty has been removed, but the individual mandate itself has not been repealed. So you still technically have to have health insurance, but if you don't have health insurance, you're not going to face that penalty. And that took into effect for the 2019, it was still effect for the 2018 tax filing season, but moving forward, the penalty is no longer going to be into effect as it stands right now. The other thing that's still sort of in the news and is more prominent in July was this case out of Texas. It was the effort to sort of repeal the ACA because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Essentially, the argument was that if there's no penalty, then that particular provision of the ACA is unconstitutional, and you can't save the whole ACA because this one part's unconstitutional. That was the argument. It's been appealed. It's now at the Fifth Circuit, which is the appellate court that covers Texas. They had oral arguments in July, and we're still waiting to see what the court decides. If it does take into effect, given the way that our court system works, it would really only affect that particular circuit. That's kind of a complicated question. So if you do have a question or concerns about the ACA, I'm happy to explain that afterwards. But as of now, the ACA is still effective. It has not been repealed. All right, so let's move on to open enrollment and insurance options. All right, so those were the basics, and we talked a little bit about how to maximize your coverage. And now I want to talk about some of the options that you're going to have if you're looking to purchase new coverage this upcoming open enrollment season. So the first one is private insurance. So in California, our exchange is called Covered California, and we also have a period of open enrollment that is a little bit longer than other states. So for us, we start in October 15th. You can navigate to Covered California to get a sense of what your options are. And in a few slides, I'm going to show you some of the little introduction into getting shopping around and comparing for insurance plans. If you are looking for plans out of state, you'll have to see whether or not you have to use healthcare.gov or if that state has established its own exchange. Those states may also have broader open enrollment periods. And if that's information that you're looking for, you can certainly ask our organization and we have that information. Oh, and the last thing about open enrollment, even though you can still go till January 15th, in order to get a plan to cover you starting January 1st, you would have to enroll by December 15th. So if you miss the December 15th deadline, your coverage will start in February. All right. So when you go to the marketplace, you're going to see that the plans are divided in terms of metal colors, and the color just generally indicates what the split of your costs and your healthcare is going to be. The quality of care should still be the same. It's just a matter of how much you are going to pay in premiums and usually also deductibles. So the first plan that you'll see are bronze. It's usually a lower monthly premium, and it's higher out-of-pocket costs and higher deductibles. The next one you'll see, and again, it goes into progression. So you have 60%, 70, 80, and 90. Platinum is typically the highest type of plan that you can get. And in the gold and platinum, you're going to have higher monthly premiums, but usually lower out-of-pocket costs for care, and also higher deductibles. And the last thing is if you have an income, you might be eligible for tax. If you have a lower income that's between 138% to 400% of the federal poverty line, you might be eligible for tax credits. If you have it lower than 138, you might be eligible for Medicaid. And that's something that you'll see when you navigate the website, whether or not you're eligible for any premium tax credits. So how do the tax credits work out exactly? So these numbers are the most up-to-date numbers. If you're an individual, this is the sort of minimum you can make to be able to get a plan off the exchange and not be eligible for Medicaid. If you're a family, it jumps up to 35. And then California expanded Medicaid. So the limit is up to 400% of the federal poverty line. And this breaks it down to these two income numbers, depending on your household number. And then even if this income is not something that, say you don't fall between these incomes, the other option that you may have is also to shop off the exchange. So the health insurance exchange is not your only option for purchasing health insurance. It's just a way, it's a market. It's one market out of many to get health insurance. And you might even find that a plan that was on the health insurance or covered California, you might be able to find that plan cheaper if you go directly to the insurance company or go through a broker. All right, so just want to run through a little bit of how Covered California works and what it looks like. I was playing around with the website a couple of days just to make sure that this is still more or less how it looks. So usually when you're trying to preview plans and see what options are out there, you're going to start with giving some basic information. As we've mentioned, your rating area is going to affect how much you pay. Your income is going to affect whether or not you are eligible for any tax credits. And then the household, of course, is reflective of the income. And then your age is another thing that gets considered. And I think these are potentially ways to screen you for other government programs. So if you are disabled or blind and you met that definition, you might be covered for a government program like Medicaid. But I'll get into that a little bit later. All right. So another way to also utilize Covered California the best way is if you have a particular doctor or facility that you like to go to and you want to see if they take an insurance plan. I wouldn't necessarily rely 100% that if they're on this, that they do take your plan. I think it's a good first step of weeding out options. But if you see a doctor and they show up here, it's always good to call their office to make sure that they're still accepting that plan and that they will be in network for you. I'm sure if you've used any of your health insurance websites, even if you're looking for a provider that says they're covered, you still have to do your diligence and make sure that they are covered, because I'm not necessarily sure that this is up to date to the day. And this is also really important if you're switching plans, but you have scheduled appointments or surgeries, and you want to make sure that this upcoming surgery is going to be covered under your plan when you get that service, as opposed to when you made the appointment. All right. So you've entered the information. We have a local LA code here to give us a little rating area. And you'll see this. You'll see a couple of plans. This is usually the cheapest ones. Well, you can sort it by expense estimate, but usually you'll start as a default with some of the more inexpensive plans. You can also filter it by plan type. Do they have any features? And then, of course, you can do metal tier. You'll see that at a glance, you'll get some very basic information, type of plan, monthly premium. Here's you get an $8 tax credit. I think the income that we used for this example was somewhere around $35,000, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Gives you a sense of how much you pay for primary care visits, generic drugs, your deductible, and then quality rating. This is for the plan itself. I'm not sure how they use this metric, but it is something that is shared. And then you also have the option to compare and view some more details about the plan. So we'll move on to that one. Next slide. So if you want to get more information about a plan, say you clicked on the plan for more details, you're still going to have this basic information, but you can also get some drug information. So we're talking about different tier drugs, how much you can expect to pay as a copay, and then after the deductible, and then also you'll see here we have co-insurance. And then if you go to any out-of-network providers, you'll have 100% co-insurance, which is 100%. And then you just also get another sense of other costs associated with prescription drugs. Oh. And since we are talking about prescription drugs, I do want to mention it's important to check the formulary. So the formulary is essentially drugs that are approved in your network to be covered. Some plans may not be in there, and you may have to go for different prescriptions. So if you have a certain prescription that you want to make sure is going to be covered through your plan, that might be information that you might want to get from the insurance company to see what medications are included in your formulary. If not, that can create an issue for an appeal, and you might have to go through different steps to try and get that particular drug covered. All right. So if you miss open enrollment, there are some other opportunities for enrollment, or say you need coverage at some other point during the year. So there's something called special enrollment, and special enrollment is you have 60 days from when you have this qualifying life event to re-enroll in a different health insurance plan. Common examples are if you turn 26, under the ACA, if you are under 26, you can still stay on your parents' health insurance plan. But once you turn 27 or turn 26, sorry, you might have to shop for new plans. And people have birthdays in different parts of the year, so that may not necessarily coincide with open enrollment. And then if you lose coverage, an example of this is if, say, you're no longer working or your spouse is no longer working, you do have 60 days from that event to find new coverage. We also have a divorce. If you move, that is also another way that you can look for new insurance. I believe this has to do with the rating area, or also just the availability of network and providers. And then also if you have a child, because you could want to add them to that policy. All right. So briefly, I want to talk about the public programs. So as I mentioned, Medi-Cal is an option for those who meet this definition. So you have limited income and resources, or you meet the definition of aged, blind, and disabled. And then certain states have expanded Medi-Cal, which essentially means if you are an adult who has a lower income and meets either has a minimum of 138% under 138% income, you might also be covered for Medicaid, whereas before Medicaid had a lot more restrictive eligibility requirements. And the other one is, of course, Medicare, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you're 65 and older, or you've been receiving SSDI, so that's Social Security Disability Insurance, for 24 months or more, you can become eligible for Medicare. And if you're 65, there's a different enrollment process. Usually it begins 3 months before your 65th birthday. You should get something in the mail letting you know that Medicare enrollment is approaching. And the other thing that makes this a little bit distinguishable from SSDI or retirement benefits is even if you haven't, say, met the requirements for SSDI, typically that's work history or work credits, you should still become eligible for Medicare. The thing that comes up with Medicare is sometimes people are still working and have employer-based coverage, and they would prefer to keep that coverage. Medicare does have a system in where they designate one insurance a primary payer and a secondary payer. If that's a concern that you have about managing two types of insurance, we can connect you with some resources to help you have a plan that makes most sense for you. And then Medicare is split into different parts, and you can sort of make your own Medicare plan. The basic components are, Part A is hospital, Part B is medical, Part D is prescription, and then you have a Medicare Advantage. Typically speaking, actually, I'll cover that in the next slide. So Medicare open enrollment is approaching. It's also October 15th, and it goes through December 17th. I know some announcements have been going out. You can go now. You should be able to go now to medicare.gov to make any changes. Oh, not now, sorry. Once open enrollment starts, you can be able to make changes, or you can start navigating the website to see what option works best for you. Even if you're satisfied with your plan, you might just want to check to see if there are any other options or if there's something that you want to modify, because plans change from year to year, and so might your needs. So the other thing is Medicare also has other enrollment periods outside of open enrollment. I did mention the initial enrollment period, which can be either as your 65th birthday is approaching, or if you've already been on SSDI for 2 years. And then there's another general enrollment period that I believe is from January 1st to March 31st. And that is for coverage that will start in July, If you have questions about these different enrollment periods, we do have a resource on our website on that, and we can also connect you with some other resources to understand which enrollment period will make most sense for you. But I do want to mention that it's very imperative that you're careful about enrollment deadlines, because if not, you might be penalized. And we do get questions about some penalties. So if you didn't find the right window to enroll, you might want to think about that, what that might mean in terms of your cost moving forward. Or if you want to avoid that, we can certainly give you information on sort of key deadlines to keep in mind. Okay. So how much does Medicare cost? So Part A, and these are 2019 numbers. I was trying to find 2020, but I didn't have much success. But the difference in prices should be, this should be more or less the same cost, maybe a little bit more, a little less. So Part A typically is free for most people. You won't have a premium. A circumstance in where you would have to pay that premium is for someone who, say, never paid into Social Security, or they don't have sufficient work history. An example of that is like a stay-at-home parent. And then this was, I think for 2019, the monthly premium was about $437 a month. And then again, it really just depends on your particular situation, how much your premium is going to be. Part B, again, is going to vary by income. If you have a higher income, it might also be a higher premium. And these are just examples of the standard premiums from 2019, annual deductible. Again, we see co-insurance for these type of services. And unfortunately, depending on because it's going to be so tailored, we don't have a set amount, but this is how it's just going to vary. But the average premium for prescriptions was about $30 a month. And I did want to share these Medicare resources so that you can get the appropriate assistance. So the Medicare Rights Center is a really great organization. They do a lot of advocacy. They do some counseling. They have some really good newsletters to keep you sort of abreast of what's happening with Medicare rights. And the other resource I want to mention is the SHIP office. So it's a state health insurance assistance program. It's a free service, and they provide information on benefits, rights, appeals. It's a really personalized service. In LA County, our office is actually called HICAP, which is Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program. And this would be your contact for LA County. And I think this also covers some other counties surrounding LA. Let's say if you wanted information for your SHIP office in a different state, or if you wanted for the HICAP office in a different county in California, we can certainly give you that. We have that information. All right. So the last thing about insurance options is, say you want to maintain or find new coverage, and Covered California is the health insurance exchange is not something that you're interested in, or maybe you find yourself in a situation where you like your employer insurance, but you are no longer able to work. So the first thing that you can do to continue your benefits is you should get a notice typically. It's called the COBRA notice. And it's an acronym that stands, it's a really long acronym, but it's a federal law, and essentially you are allowed to maintain your coverage, your same health insurance plan for 18 months or possibly 36 months, depending on what caused you to lose your coverage. And the caveat on this is, although you get to maintain your coverage, you're now responsible for the full premium, or sometimes a little bit more. Some states have their own version if, say, you work for an employer that has less than 20. In California, we have CalCobra. So it covers employees under the 20 employee limit. And the other thing that's really neat about CalCobra is if you've exhausted this COBRA coverage, you can get it extended. And you can use CalCobra to extend that coverage. But for CalCobra, again, you'll be responsible for the full premium and an additional 10% or so. So it'll be 110% of your premium you'll have to pay for CalCobra, typically speaking. And then again, I mentioned Covered California special enrollment. If, say, the COBRA premiums are just not accessible, or it's not a price point that makes sense, you might also want to compare for a different plan on Covered California or the enrollment, because if you had lost your employer-based coverage, then this could generally qualify for a special enrollment. All right, And then if you have no way of obtaining coverage and you don't qualify for government insurance, there's still some options. Again, I mentioned private insurance through a company or a broker. That can be one option. You might be able to get a competitive rate. There's also this program called Hill-Burton. So essentially, Congress gave hospitals and other health facilities money for construction and modernization. And in return, the facilities agreed to provide funds to provide services to people who are unable to pay. Funding for this program stopped in the 90s, but certain facilities are still obligated to provide that free care. You can call the national hotline to get a list of facilities that are still obligated to provide some services. The other option is charity care. A lot of hospitals have their own financial assistance program, or they might be able to sort of provide some care under their charity care programs. A good way to find out whether your hospital does this is to speak either with a social worker or your patient services and determine if you have any options under charity care. All right. So I want to touch a little bit on health insurance appeals, something to keep in mind if the plan that you have now doesn't cover a particular service, or maybe you had an issue. It's also something to keep in mind where you're still thinking about health insurance. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do want to highlight a few things. So first is some issues can be resolved without the need of an appeal. And they usually fall under two camps. So you have billing issues and you have medication issues. So this is why it's important to open your mail and to review your evidence of coverage and any of the charges. Sometimes a provider uses the wrong billing code. Again, you can see whether or not they think there was a prior authorization or they didn't have it on record. Maybe a service is more preventative versus diagnostic, double billing. And then typically one of the main questions that we get about services not being covered is that's not deemed medically necessary. So once you know why something's being denied, you can go about sort of addressing it, and hopefully you might not have to go through the formal appeal process. For medication, some of the issues that end up coming up are, say that medication's not on the formulary. It could be a generic drug, or maybe it could be a name brand drug, depending on how your health insurance is tiering these drugs. That might be something that you can sort of investigate and maybe even talk to your provider about finding an alternative type of drug that might fit into this structure. The other resource that we do have is pharmacies offer discounts, and pharmacies or even pharmaceutical companies do have some assistance programs. We have a handout that is about all these, that includes various pharmacy financial assistance programs. So that's definitely a resource that's available on our website. And then the other part that happens is step therapy. So the insurance company won't let you get this medication until they've seen that you've tried these other medications before that. And that could be another issue that can be resolved before you have to go through the formal appeal process. So if you do have to go through an appeal process, you should know what your rights are. You can appeal denials of coverage or insufficient coverage. You should do it in writing, unless it's urgent. Even still, having a paper trail is very advisable. And these are other examples of issues that can be appealed. And another part that I'm not sure that most people are familiar with is involving your medical team. So once you understand why the insurance company is denying it, you can talk to your team or your provider about the denial. They can also help you in structuring and providing any information to the insurance company. The thing that comes up is really your medical teams might not be aware of insurance difficulties. So if you're not communicating with them, you're not really looping them in to help you. And if they are able to help you, then you can avoid a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. If you have health insurance, that's through Medi-Cal or Medicare. It's a separate process, but this is mainly for private insurance. The other thing about private insurance is when you get denied, you should get a letter telling you the process to appeal and any deadlines. You should be very wary, pay attention to those deadlines and the process. And there's generally 2 stages of appeals. There's generally 2 stages of appeal. You usually have to go through the internal process with the company. And if that decision is not favorable, then you're entitled to an external appeal. In California, it's through an independent medical review. And once that external review is finalized, that decision is final. We have a lot of resources on organizations that can assist you with appeals. Another issue that can come up sometimes with appeals is an insurance company might not ever issue a final decision on an internal review, an internal appeal, and that can delay it. So I'm going to show you some resources of people who can help you advocate for yourself so you can at least abide through the procedures and try and get any coverage that's been denied covered. And that's going to come at the end of the presentation. All right, so next we're going to move on to disability insurance. There are generally three types of disability insurance. There's private plans, there's federal long-term insurance, and there's state disability options. So let's start with private insurance. So again, private disability insurance is another contract. So you have to look at the details of the plan. This could be something that you buy as an individual, or it could be something that you get through your employer. The policy is going to determine the percent of your income that you get reimbursed, not reimbursed, that you'll receive, the duration of the benefits, and any extension of the benefits. And if, say, it's a short-term plan versus a long-term plan, what the process would be to transition to a longer-term plan. The other thing to note is that your policy might require you to take an offset and apply for a public program. And I'm going to talk about the offset. I'll talk about it right now. So let's think about, so say your plan says you're going to get $1,500 as your income that's replaced. And then they tell you that you have to go and apply for a public program. You apply for the public program, you get approved. SSA would be an example of the public program. SSA says they're going to pay you $1,000. That's the benefit that you're going to get. Here is where the offset creates some confusion. So rather than getting $1,500 and then $1,000 and coming out together, what you're actually going to get is just $1,500. The way that it breaks down is you're going to get $1,000 from SSDI, and then you'll get $500 from the insurance plan. The insurance plan wants you to apply for that public benefit to offset their cost of how much they have to pay out of the policy. And sometimes I've heard that private insurance companies also help you apply for SSDI if that's a concern that you have. The other thing that I have heard come up is, say you receive payments from the policy and then they have you apply for SSDI. Some might ask to be paid back the amount. And that's something that you should look into your policy to see if there's a provision on paying back any payments if it is that you end up applying for SSDI and get approved. So let's look into SSDI and the other program, which is SSI. So there are two programs that are administered. These are two examples of programs administered by the Social Security Administration. The first is Social Security Disability Insurance, and then the second one is Supplemental Security Income. So they have some similarities and differences. The first similarity is in their definition of disability. They both use the same definition. So in order to be considered to have a disability through SSA standards, you have to be unable to perform substantial gainful activity. And that's a term of art. And a good way of conceptualizing that is through your ability to generate a certain amount of monthly income. I believe right now it should be somewhere around $1,200 a month. And so if you're unable to generate that much income, then you might not be able to earn substantial gainful activity. The next one is due to a physical or mental impairment. And these definitions are pretty broad, and it doesn't have to necessarily include a cancer condition. It can also include symptoms. So this is where you can work with your doctor to make sure that you're conveying to SSA the symptoms and your medical condition and how that's an impairment and preventing you from working. And then the other component is that this impairment is expected to last a year or more or result in death. So once you meet that definition, you might want to look to see which program makes most sense for you or which one you'll actually be eligible for. So here's where the differences come into play. So SSI is based on financial need. It's going to look, eligibility is based on financial need. It's going to look at any income and assets that you have, which again reflects whether or not you actually need the SSI. And it has a pretty quick turnaround for once you apply for benefits. So usually a month after applying, you can start receiving SSI benefits. The benefits are low. I think also this is somewhere around $1,200. It could be adjusted depending on your family household, and also if you have any income or assets, it'll be offset. Your amount will be offset by how much you have. The other more common one is SSDI, and this is going to look at your work history and earnings. So this is a deduction that you'll see in paychecks. This is what pays towards your Social Security. There are different tests in order to see whether or not you meet the work history and earnings requirement. Usually there's a recent earnings test, and then there is just a work history test. The recent earnings test is essentially in the last 10 years, did you work 5 out of those 10 years? So because you're paying into it through your own payroll deductions, it's not going to look at income and assets. It's your own insurance. It's your money that you put into account to save towards retirement. But you're able to access that amount earlier if you're determined to have a disability by SSA. And the last thing that happens that comes up often is this 5-month waiting period. And that's a little complicated, but the 5-month waiting period is from the date of disability. So once SSA determined that there was at a certain date you were no longer able to perform substantial gainful activity and you met this definition, then you have to wait 5 months before you start getting SSDI payments. And one way to address this is if, say, you've waited to apply for disability benefits, but you have an earlier date. So the example I like to use is, say you were determined by your doctor, or you just were unable to work and the SSA decides that you were disabled in January 2018, but you waited until May to apply for benefits. The process takes a while, usually 3 to 4 months in order to get approved for SSA benefits. So you were approved in October for benefits. You're also entitled to back pay. You can get back pay up to 12 months. So in this scenario, you were first disabled in January, but you applied in May. So from January to May, you won't get any payments for those months, but you will get payments from June to October. And that would probably start in October. So back pay is an option to offset some of that waiting period, but you can't really skip this waiting period. The one thing you can do is if you have a condition that's under the compassionate allowance list. So SSA has a list of conditions that automatically meet the definition of disability. You can get your application expedited. So you don't have to wait as long to know you're approved, but you still have to wait to receive benefits. Right. So if you are looking for income and for income replacement, but your condition's not expected to last more than a year, you might want to look at state disability insurance programs. Not all states offer state disability insurance. California does. And these two programs are administered through the Employment Development Department, so EDD. They also do unemployment insurance. And the way that it works is you are eligible to get up to a year's worth of benefits, so 52 weeks, or the amount in your account. This is another payroll deduction. So you have to work and it gets deducted from your payroll, and you're paying into this disability insurance account. And you have to have earned at least $300 of SDI taxes. So if you ever looked at your pay stub, you'll see this SDI. That's where you have to put enough into the account. The other interesting thing about this is that you really only need to be unable to work for 8 days, for at least 8 calendar days, as opposed to the year requirement. And then you also have to file a claim. There's a time limit about 49 days from when you become disabled. You get about 60 to 70% of your wages. It's not a lot, but usually if you have to take leave and you've paid into this, you can get disability. You can start getting this disability amount while you're still working to determine whether SSA benefits are something that you're eligible for. And again, the amount in the account is a little weird, but if you didn't pay into it, so you hadn't been working, so you worked for a few months and then you stop working, you're only really going to get the amount that you worked. And EDD has a chart table similar to unemployment insurance of what quarters qualify for benefits. The other option, and this is primarily for caregivers, is paid family leave, and you get payments for up to 6 weeks. So you cannot take paid family leave for yourself. You would generally rely on state disability insurance if you're looking for one of these programs, but this is for caring for a loved one. There's definitions of who's considered family in the code. And yeah, so it's only 6 weeks. It's about the same percentage. And neither of these programs offer job protection. So you might, if you are out on disability insurance and if you didn't take that in connection with, say, a Family Medical Leave Act leave or the California equivalent, which is CFRA, California Family Rights Act, then there's no guarantee that you'll be able to go back to your work if you ended up taking these benefits. All right, so here are some resources that I want to highlight. The Patient Advocate Foundation is a really helpful resource, especially if you are looking for assistance with health insurance appeals. They also have a case management program if you find that you need some assistance with managing your treatment, and they also provide other resources. Then, of course, I mentioned the health insurance marketplace. The national one is healthcare.gov. If your state has their own marketplace or another state that's not California, you'll be redirected. So California is covered California. And then this resource is also, I think, really useful. In California, hospitals are required to post whether or not they have free or discount payment programs. So if you go to this link and you click on it, I think you have to enter either the zip code or an address or a particular hospital, and it's going to pull up their programs. So if you're visiting a facility, you can see if it's on there, and I think this could give you a little bit of help if you're going to, say, a social worker or patient services, and you want to confirm whether or not that program is still available and what the requirements are. And then this is I believe it's through the Department of Insurance, or maybe Consumer Affairs, but they're a patient advocacy organization. They have a lot of resources. You can call that number. They help you better understand your health insurance and might also help you understand health insurance plans. And we have a few more resources on our website, but these are the few that I wanted to highlight. And I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes or a few seconds. That is the presentation. I'll flip back in a second. And I think we're going to move to the questions and answers. Again, just want to remind you about our intake form and more information on us, but I'll push back to resources.
Thank you so much, Dayana. This is so much information and it's really complex. So I'm sure we do have some questions. Before we go to the questions, I just wanted to see in our audience here, our live audience, how many people have private insurance? Like private Blue Cross, Blue Shield through your employer? Okay. And how many people have Medicare? Okay. And how many people, anyone on SSDI now? The Social Security Disability? SSI? Okay, just want to get a sense. And I'm really glad you picked up on that question of being able to see a different provider, because we have a lot of questions for people who want to see Dr. Lee. And they say, I have this insurance and they won't let me go there. So, so maybe we start with that question. If someone has an insurance and they're saying, we will not allow you to go to City of Hope to see this specialist, what's their best approach to being able to do that?
Finding out why they're saying that they won't allow you. Are they trying to send you to a specialist in that particular network, or their own specialist? And if, say, I guess the next question would be like, okay, what if I go to the specialist and I want a different opinion from that specialist? What would be the process? Okay, so is there anyone here who's had that particular issue? Maybe not Dr. Lee, but you want to see a specialist because we have a rare cancer. So, and you have an insurance now that will not let you go see the specialist. Okay, can you just say a little bit, what's the coverage you do have?
My coverage currently is through Anthem Blue Cross HMO. We are in a healthcare partners network, and there is not a specialist within that network.
Right.
I currently see another doctor through City of Hope, unrelated to the cancer. I see a hematologist oncologist. This is my fourth one. and they don't know enough about NETs. So when they submit tests or referrals to other doctors, it's not that my insurance denies it. They don't understand how to even refer me out to see other people or obtain the testing that I need. The knowledge just isn't where it needs to be. So when I am sent to a doctor, many doctors are refusing to see me. And when I ask for a specialist, well, City of Hope isn't within Healthcare Partners Network.
Right.
So
So
I-
sometimes they don't even know what they don't know.
Right.
So in that type of situation, what advice would you give?
I would try to find out from your insurance what you need to have your doctor do. If it is that your doctors don't know what to do and you're trying to get a service covered, then I think that's where it's helpful to go to the insurance and be like, this is a pushback I'm getting from these doctors. I'm not able to get these services. What can I do? And ultimately, you're trying to utilize your insurance and get that covered, so they should be the ones who should be able to tell you what's going on. And even if you're having, if you're having really complicated issues, this is where you might want to speak also to like a health insurance attorney. We do have our professional panel attorneys at CLRC, and they've essentially agreed to do a 30-minute consultation. And they could be another form of advocacy. Usually this happens, I've heard it happen more when people are having issues with insurance appeals, they're getting a lot of pushback. So that might also be another tool, is to just reach out to a private attorney so you can be a better advocate. And also they can do something that we can't, and something that I can do right now is they can give you legal advice, whether or not they're complying with the contract, and if so, what enforcement mechanisms you have to enforce the contract provisions. Mm-hmm.
What does that mean specifically? Like member services, who do you look to contact at the insurance company? Big octopus.
I don't know specifically who. So that's where I would probably also refer you to health insurance advocates and organizations. They are more familiar with getting insurance companies to reimburse for these billing issues or billing disputes. And they might be familiar with like the particular insurance company, like, oh, at Blue Shield, you need to contact this department as opposed to the other department. I understand that it can be really frustrating trying to like get transferred from one department to another department. They might know a little bit more about that.
So Dr. Lee, I was going to ask, I'm sure you have some feedback from the other side.
Yeah, so I think one of the difficulties that we encounter for neuroendocrine tumors is that oftentimes, anyone can necessarily look up some type of guideline for a standard therapy. And sometimes the HMOs will kind of push back and say that, well, your doctor, your local doctor, or a provider that's covered within the HMO can provide the same type of treatment that a NET specialist can provide. But I think where it gets really tricky for neuroendocrine tumor patients is that while anyone can look up those recommendations, what we know for this disease is that there's a lack of sequencing data. So it's not whether or not you know what to prescribe, but it's whether or not you know when to do something, how to do it, and how to potentially manage the complexities of whatever you're going to do, and with things that are down the line. So I think this is one of the key struggles that we have, because we have seen patients, for example, if we start them on a standard therapy, and their HMO essentially pulls that patient back to their local doctor. And then we feel that essentially the patient gets kind of lost in the process as a result of that. And it's pretty horrible, because then, I know from our standpoint, we're kind of tied because the HMO won't let that patient kind of come back to us. And then the patient, it feels like they're not getting necessarily good care as well. So is there any way in those scenarios to, have discussions with their insurance company, like how can we kind of justify that to the insurance company to say that as kind of a community, we are providing something, even though it's a same, treatment. It's just that we're able to kind of infuse the knowledge aspect of it more so than the actual treatment.
I'm not sure if there's an exact process other than collectively coming together and maybe sharing stories of what has proved successful with certain certain insurance companies and what like the typical pushback would be. I think it's really where you've broken it down in terms of the insurance company is pushing back on the patient a lot. It's really where we push advocacy. There are patient navigators who can also understand even maybe potentially certain conditions and certain providers and where are going to be the common ones. But I think this is a pretty big problem if it's an insurance company. And really the best thing that we tend to provide are resources of advocates who are familiar and are able to push back in the right way for the patient, has a patient in mind.
I mean, because the issue is that, I can see someone and I can even, let's say for our fundamental treatment with somatostatin analogs, I can recommend somatostatin analogs. But I can tell you if somatostatin analogs are being managed in the wrong hands, it can potentially be very detrimental, because the issue is that, yes, it's just a relatively easy to administer injection. Well, what if you just got diagnosed with neuroendocrine tumor and you started on somatostatin analog therapy and you see a provider and they get a follow-up scan, and for whatever reason, they see that you've had about a millimeter or 2 millimeter growth. And they will say immediately, for someone that might not have as much knowledge on the disease, will say that, you've already progressed on somatostatin analog therapy. Well, did you really progress on somatostatin analog therapy? It could be that the quality of the scan that you got might not have been very good. It could be that you actually delayed the start of your treatment by a month or 6 weeks after you were diagnosed and everything. And the scan that they're comparing to, there's some lag time and everything. But it has a very negative impact, because if that provider then takes you off of that therapy, you've lost a key fundamental backbone of treatment for your neuroendocrine tumor, something that can potentially be controlling your neuroendocrine tumor for multiple years. And that's, that has a negative impact, right? The insurance company will always argue that, well, it's the same treatment. But as you can see, the management is completely different.
Right. And I think maybe that's where there's a little disconnect as a medical provider whose your sole interest is the care of your patient and their well-being, as opposed to the insurance company who is trying to follow their policy and cover the costs in a way that they think is, I don't know if it's in their best, but sort of they're the ones who set the conditions. So maybe appealing and streamlining your process is something, but I think it's just really two different approaches to care and services. And I'm not sure that I have the expertise to really find an answer of how to solve that disconnect, or are these sort of reconnected? Yes.
Question on this discussion. So it sounds like this discussion so far has been making the distinction between getting care from an in-network provider who maybe doesn't have the specialized knowledge versus getting care at a major cancer center like City of Hope, where there is specialized knowledge. But I wonder if there's a middle ground and I wonder how insurance companies handle this these days, where the patient still gets care at the in-network provider, but has consultations with the expert at the major cancer center who's out of network. And so you want the insurance company to pay for those consultations, but still have the care provided by the in-network provider.
So
does that work?
No. So I think you bring up a really good point, and this is something that we're trying to do within the community. But I always say that it's somewhat of a two-way street as well. And I think our focus has always been especially through various organization meetings such as, Healing Net. How do we bridge the gap between, patients as well as providers, right? And I think it's actually, real frankly, sometimes very hard to do in the setting that you just described. I have patients that come to see me for a one-time second opinion consultation. And they say that, well, I want you to manage my neuroendocrine tumor from afar. Well, it's a lot more difficult than what you envision, because even if I talk to the doctor on the other side of it, oftentimes they might miss when we wanted a certain scan. They might not order the scan that we actually told them what to order and put it in an email and everything. They might not return calls when acute toxicity happens and everything. And all of those things creates additional barriers in terms of how we're able to manage that. Once a patient is outside of our kind of fundamental in-house control, we actually lose a lot of that control. And I think the concern that I have is, if I don't even necessarily know what is going on to the patient, how can I safely be recommending certain things that I'm recommending compared to, let's say, if this was someone that I'm seeing on a more frequent basis where I know, kind of from a day in, day out perspective, exactly what is going on to that patient. So I think it gets a little bit trickier than that in terms of the middle ground. I think this is where really kind of educating other providers come in, and there's a lot of missions that are focused on that. So for maybe someone who's not as familiar with neuroendocrine tumors in the community, how can we educate those providers so that they can be more familiar with a rare disease and a rare diagnosis, so that they would be essentially able to perform everything that we would be able to perform here, and kind of minimize some of those barriers.
I just want to say, first off, we went through this to see him in April, and the doctor who had to approve me to get the second opinion, he's the same doctor who turned us down to get the meds I should have had 4 years ago and said I didn't need to see somebody else for this kind of cancer. So it was a little hard getting through her to get it done, but we finally did. So that brings me to my other question. I need to get another second opinion now for something else. And thanks to Dr. Liu. Yes, and now, how you said there was some sort of organization to help with getting second opinions, because I'm not getting the answers, getting this done again.
Right, and I think the second opinion is in their name. That's not a resource that I have offhand. Actually, I can check.
Okay.
But they do provide some services. I believe they're located in the Bay Area, but it's a statewide resource. I don't think I brought it with me, but if that's something you want, you can submit an intake or send us an email. We can give you that resource.
The other question is about disability SDI.
Hmm?
No, I was standing back there, but I didn't see. Is there a limit on how long? Because I got laid off last year just in time for this stuff to take off.
Hmm.
And is there a limit on how long they allow they go back for SDI?
Yep, that would be the recent earnings test. So they're going to look back at the last 10 years
Okay.
and see if in those 5 years you were. Yeah. So,
Another point about SSDI, a friend of mine many years ago told me I should apply for SSDI, and I've always been self-employed, so I thought I didn't qualify because I didn't have an employer per se. But even as a self-employed person, you do pay in, so I was eligible, and in fact, I lost a year of benefits because I didn't listen to her soon enough. And this was also before Covered California, so I had a Blue Cross PPO, and they were trying to get rid of me, and there wasn't any other option for someone with pre-existing conditions at that time in 2005. So SSDI has been a really great program, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. They also, since a lot of us have metastases in our liver, they tend to look at our file and go, oh, okay, approved. So And I know your organization helps people as well with disability claims or trying to get on disability.
So we don't provide assistance in applying, but we can refer you to either a legal aid organization if you meet the income limits, or in California, and specifically the LA area, some attorneys that do SSDI. We also have a lot of information on SSDI appeals, reasons why you might be appealed. And sometimes we also get questions about working while receiving SSDI. There's a trial period if you're interested in going back into the workforce. We have some information on that. So it's really resources. Actually, helping you apply with government benefits is not something that we do.
Okay. There was one question that came in online, and it's an easier question.
Okay.
It was about if somebody moves, if they're on Medicare and they move to another state, does that coverage go with them? Thought it was an easier question.
I've gotten this question before, and I wasn't particularly satisfied with my answer. I think, and again, I can't give legal advice, and the best resource to check would be Medicare themselves. But I think the Medicare plan, you should get coverage because it's a federal program. But the thing that comes up are supplemental plans. So if you have Medigap, those I think are also region specific, and you might want to see what happens if you move. And if you move to a different state, what plans are available in that state? I've gotten that question before, and I'm not happy with my answer.
Okay, thank you. The one thing we know, though, is that Medicare does not cover us outside of the U.S. Is that right?
I believe so.
So if I take a trip to Europe, even though I have Medicare here, I'm not going to be covered if something happens outside of the U.S. Yeah, the supplement covered. Okay, question in the back, Dikla.
Hi. Well, I have several, but I'll start and you stop me when you need to. I was wondering, can someone get both SSI and SSDI at the same time?
Yes. And usually the way that comes up is if your SSDI amount is below the threshold for SSI. So that can't come up. But you don't get like two payments. It's really, you get a set amount, and whoever contributes is gonna be based on your eligibility for both programs. And some people have applied for SSI first while they're waiting for SSDI. It really is going to depend if you meet the eligibility for both programs.
But the max would be whatever max is for either one?
Well, yeah, because SSI has a max, right? So if you're getting a payment from SSDI that's still not that large and it's under that max, then you're fine, because SSDI will be considered in how much you're receiving in terms of the leave income. But you can get both. It's just the amount's not going to be that much.
So SSI fills in the gap, you're saying?
Yeah, if you have a low SSDI amount.
I see. Okay. And then how does SSDI affect retirement if you get it under the age of 65?
It doesn't. Once you turn 65, you start collecting the retirement benefit. It's the
regular amount. You're not reduced or anything?
It's the amount you paid into it. So you should be, it would just transition naturally.
And this is kind of the last question. Just on balance billing, it's a completely off topic, but what's happening is that the anesthesia, you say you have a surgery, in-network surgeon, in-network hospital, in-network, you think everything, and then obviously the anesthesiologist is not, and a bill comes 8 months later. Mm-hmm. What is the law or rights regarding that?
I'm not sure whether or not California has any legislation about balance billing. I know some states have. That's definitely a question that I can look into. But usually in those billing issues, you can negotiate bills and you can also appeal them. So say you were supposed to look at your policy and look for anesthesiologists or do whatever diligence the insurance company thought you were supposed to do. You can appeal that, you can get that amount reduced. We have a few handouts on negotiating medical bills, and also we have some resources for some medical billing advocates, and where maybe the amount you were being billed is still not a fair amount. So yeah, if you wanted more information on balance billing and what's happening in California, submit an intake with our organization. We'll give you a more sort of in-depth response.
And one last question
Mhm.
that seems to be flittering and disappearing and coming back.
All right.
Oh, if you get a lawyer to help with SSDI applications,
Mhm.
there is, I forgot what it was, but there's some kind of limit in what they can charge, or
Yes,
do you know those details?
I do. So they are, it's up to 6,000 of the past due benefits, and the percentage of the benefits that they can collect is, I think it's 25 or maybe 15%. But when you sign the forms for SSA to have an attorney representative, it's a fixed amount by statute. So they can't deviate, they can't charge you more than that. And usually when you're trying to hire an attorney, you should feel comfortable asking what the percentages are. You should get a copy of the retainer, which is a contract. And SSA has their own forms, and that tells you explicitly how much more they can collect and what percentage of that amount they can get. And I know there's sometimes some concerns of how they take that amount. Sometimes they can get a percentage from each monthly check. It really just depends on the way they set up that payment plan.
So both for either SSI or SSDI, there's a fixed
Attorney's fees, the
attorney.
max that they can charge. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Had a question in the back?
You mentioned that those who are under or until they're 26, they are under their parents.
Mhm.
Was that only for Covered California, or is an under 26-year-old who's on Medi-Cal, is it still that they become responsible at 26, or how does that work, or where do I find out?
So it's only for, I believe, private insurance plans. So if you're under 26, you can stay on your parents' coverage because, I mean, but certain states, and I believe California, is trying to expand the age of eligibility for Medi-Cal. I think there was something recent in the news that Governor Newsom was trying to pass to make sure that Medi-Cal covers people under 26, and it might also cover other immigrant groups. The specific requirements, I'm not sure, but when I was referencing staying on your parents' insurance, it was for private insurance.
And so is that include Covered California insurance or no?
So yeah, Covered California
would be,
is,
okay.
well, it's a private insurance that you're buying through Covered California.
Right, okay. And then you mentioned one other thing I'd like to ask about, that Social Security has a compassionate allowance list.
Mhm.
Where can that be found?
So it's on their website, and we also, usually when we give you information about SSDI, that's one of the links that we provide. It's a pretty easy website. We just Google SSA Compassionate Allowance List, and I think they have it categorized by like letter.
So on one of the slides for Covered California, you were contrasting the bronze programs with the gold and platinum programs.
Yes.
They both said higher deduction. Is that correct, or is one of those higher, a lower higher deduction than the other high deduction?
I caught that slide too. You'll have to look at them. It should be a lower deductible.
On which one?
On the gold plan.
On gold, okay.
It should be if like the platinum plan, but that's something that you have to look at. But yeah, higher deductibles are usually a component that people overlook when they're trying to get a lower monthly premium.
I would think so, but that's not what the slide said. Okay, thank you. And then the second clarification, when you were talking about Medi-Cal and Medicaid on the first slide, what came out of your mouth was, or excuse me, Medi-Cal and Medicare, what came out was Medicaid. Is that yet a third program, or is that what Medi-Cal is called now?
Yeah. So Medicaid is the program, the nationwide program, and each state has their own version. So in California, it's Medi-Cal. In Tennessee, it's TennCare, and then other states have some other acronym or name.
Is your list of professional panel of attorneys online?
No, you'd have to submit an intake for us, and then whatever your request is, if you're, say, you can submit an intake that'd be simple as, I'm looking for an SSDI attorney, and I live in Brea. And then we try to see who's on our list that's sort of close by, and we would give you their contact information.
My other question is, apparently Kaiser is going to be on strike beginning in October. For those patients who are Kaiser patients who have NETs. They generally have a shot that's taken once a month. And they go to certain specialized doctors at Kaiser that treat NETs. What does the patient do if Kaiser is on strike? I have talked to the provider of the monthly shot, and they have a service where they will send the nurse to the patient's home or to his office or her office for the monthly shot, and then negotiate with Kaiser later on for reimbursement. But do you have any experience whatsoever at your organization when the medical facility is on strike, such as Kaiser?
I do not. But if you have something that's planned and you think that a strike or something is going to interfere with it, then communicating with the provider what your options are going to be, because I can imagine that they have to have taken that into account. Like, what do we do if the hospital is going to go on strike? How do we provide this care? So I would start early on that to find out what your options are.
When you were talking about the Affordable Care Act, one of the things you explained was there are only a few criteria that are allowed to be used for setting premiums, one of which was geography, or the so-called rating area.
Yep.
So I have questions about this idea of rating areas. Who determines the boundaries of the rating area? Is that something done by the federal government, the state government, the insurance companies, or what? Are these rating areas the same for various kinds of insurance? So, for example, you have private insurance bought through the exchange, off-exchange private insurance. You have Medicare, which also has geographical coverage areas for Parts C and for supplemental coverage. So who sets? Are they the same for all these kinds of insurance? The same geographical rating areas, and whether or not they're the same, who determines them all, and how do you find out what those boundaries are? Most of you mentioned websites where that's important. They ask you for your zip code. Well,
sure.
the rating area is much bigger than a zip code. So how do you find out what the rating area is? One thing I think I know is that they never cross state boundaries. I'm pretty sure of that. But what size are they? And California has multiple ones, I'm pretty sure. So how do you find out? And okay, so it says a whole bunch of questions, but they're all on the subject of rating areas.
Right. So I don't know how they're set. My gut reaction is if you have these very technical questions about insurance, I would contact the State Department of Insurance. And they have a consumer hotline, and they can probably direct you to the right person, maybe even to an insurance code if it's something that's regulated by state insurance, as to like how you break up these geographic areas. Is there like a percentage difference versus like a metropolitan area versus a small town area? These are very sort of specific questions that I would imagine the Department of Insurance would know.
On SSDI, how do they determine your level of benefit? Is it as soon as you are eligible to collect normal SS income, that being what your projection is at age 62 and a half, or is it the full age of 67? I doubt that it's going to be the 70 amount, age 70 amount. So how do they calculate the SSDI amount relative to my starting point at full retirement age or early or late?
I don't know the actual formula, but that would be a question for SSA. And I know SSA has like a calculator to show you how much you would get at this point. I'm curious to see whether or not that would be a function of if it was just SDI, or if you can ask, if you go, say you use a calculator and you get a percentage, and then you call SSA and you're like, I'm in the process of disability. Is this going to be the amount that I can rely on, or are there other factors that are going to be considered for my payment amount?
Okay, we didn't promise easy questions. One more down here. While we're going there, so since an open enrollment is coming up soon, Is there anyone who has a specific open enrollment question, like you're considering making a switch? And let's,
We have Kaiser, so, and I have a loud voice now. So let's say we decide because he's got nets and we can't seem to get the help that he really needs, maybe we just have him switch and the rest of the family stays on Kaiser. Can you do that through Cover California? Or does the whole family have to switch to a different insurance?
I think it's going to depend on the policy that you purchased. A good starting point would be talking to the actual insurance company, because usually the policies run for like a year. So during open enrollment, if you wanted to make any modifications to your plan, that would be something that you would call them. And I know that they have different departments for individual plans and family plans. So say if you wanted to remove a family member, what would be that process? And then the next step would be for the now removed family member, he wants an individual plan. I would imagine once your coverage stops with the family plan, then when you purchase your new plan on Covered California, the coverage would then just start for the calendar year.
And then how do you pick a plan that will best enable him to get the care that he needs? So that's another issue.
Well, that's where you have to shop around for the types of, well, now that if you have the service with Kaiser, the HMO, and you've already found out the things that you don't like. So you look at plans to see if they can address those dislikes, and can they cover if it's an issue of like, do you have issues with the formulary? Do you have issues with the provider options? Do you have issues with just the management? And shop around. So essentially look at the plans. I want a coverage. There are a lot of patient education resources. There's another resource in California that I think is called the Health Consumer Alliance, and they give free legal assistance when it comes to insurance questions. And if that's something that you wanted some more information on, that is a resource that we typically provide. We provide the California Office of Patient Advocate. There's another Consumer Alliance organization. So I really do want to stress, our intake, we have a lot of information. We do want to give you tailored resources, which is why we push the intake. It's a free service. And we are limited. We can't give you legal advice. I can't give you legal advice, but we do try to connect you with the resources and people who can give you legal advice.
That kind of goes along with my question, and I don't know if the doctor can answer this better or you. So when I went to my oncologist, we switched last year to a PPO thinking I could get the right scans and see a specialist. So my oncologist just showed me the screen and said, this is what the insurance okays for your type of cancer. And it was maybe 5 things. Okay. And you had to start on that list. Is that with all insurance plans, or was that just with mine with United Healthcare, or do all oncologists get that same list? I'm curious.
I don't think there's a list from our sense and everything. Usually what happens for some of our patients that see us or is referred to us is that we will order the test. And depending on what your insurance policy is, you might have kind of more specific policies for imaging, for example. I know there's been kind of different policies for imaging. And what happens is for certain types of policies, we might get authorization right away to proceed relatively quickly in a few days. Other policies will say that it takes about a 10-day review before they make a decision of whether or not that imaging gets done or not. And for those patients, sometimes it can be very difficult because if you need a scan immediately, let's say on that day, let's say there's concern for biliary obstruction or something like that, then you're kind of stuck trying to do that as an outpatient. You might have to look for other ways to get that imaging. And then, for kind of the more kind of sophisticated imaging, like, PET CTs and whatnot. Again, it goes through a similar process. We have to have authorization for all of those things. And our specialists usually first reach out to get authorization. If we don't get authorization, then we ask why. Why is it denied for that specific plan? And then we can have either peer-to-peers or I've had, for whatever reason, one time when gallium dotatate first came out, an insurance company just flat out denied it, even after multiple peer-to-peers. So then we ended up appealing. So we went through the formal appeals process where we mailed everything in and kind of made our case for why this should not be appealed and everything. And finally, it got overturned. It delayed the scan, obviously, that scan instead of being done. But ultimately, we were able to get it after fighting for it for about 3 months. So I think it's really plan specific. But in terms of a doctor saying that they have a list of what they can order, that doesn't really exist. So it's you put in the order, and whatever the policy will then have to review it for authorization, and then you kind of go from there.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dayana, for being here. This is really crucial to our well-being. And thank you to City of Hope and Dr. Lee for supporting us and arranging for this wonderful room and being here on a Saturday. So thank you all for coming. We'll see you next month.